The rain hammered against the windows of St. Mary's Hospital in Springfield, Missouri, as Dr. Patricia Reeves finished her rounds on that cold November night in 1998. The maternity ward was unusually quiet, with only 3 newborns in the nursery. Among them was a healthy baby boy, born just hours earlier to Lisa Hartwell, a 22-year-old college student who had arrived at the hospital alone, her face streaked with tears and determination. Lisa had spent months preparing for this moment, knowing she would have to give up her son for adoption. The papers were already signed, the adoptive family chosen, the Andersons, a loving couple from Kansas City who had been trying to have children for over a decade. Everything was arranged, legal and final, or so everyone believed. If you're finding this story as compelling as I am, please hit that subscribe button below and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers around the world. Your support means everything to us here at the channel. Now, let's continue with this incredible story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about truth and justice. The next morning brought chaos that would haunt Springfield for decades. When nurse Helen Crawford arrived for her 6 a.m. shift, she immediately noticed something was wrong. The bassinet that had held Baby Boy Hartwell was empty, the identification bracelet lying discarded on the pristine white sheets. The security footage showed nothing unusual, just the regular parade of medical staff going about their duties. But somehow, impossibly, a newborn had vanished without a trace. Lisa's anguished cries echoed through the hospital corridors as police officers questioned staff members and sealed off the maternity ward. Her voice cracked as she pleaded with anyone who would listen. "Please, just bring him back. I don't care about anything else. Just bring my baby back." The young mother had planned to spend one final night with her son before the adoption proceedings began. But that opportunity had been stolen along with her child. Detective Frank Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran of the Springfield Police Department, had worked missing persons cases before, but never anything like this. The hospital's security system was state-of-the-art for 1998, with cameras covering every entrance and exit. Yet somehow, a 6-pound infant had disappeared without leaving any trace on the surveillance footage. "In all my years," Rodriguez would later tell reporters, "I've never seen a baby just disappear from a hospital. These places are like fortresses." The investigation consumed the community within hours. Local news stations interrupted regular programming to report the disappearance, showing grainy hospital security footage and Lisa's tearful pleas for her son's return. The story spread across Missouri and neighboring states, with volunteers organizing search parties despite the logical improbability of finding an infant outdoors in November weather. The hospital became a media circus, with news vans lining the parking lot and reporters interviewing anyone willing to speak. Dr. Reeves found herself at the center of the investigation, recounting her movements from the previous night over and over again. She had checked on the baby at 11 p.m., noting in her records that he was sleeping peacefully and showed no signs of distress. The night shift nurses, Helen Crawford and Maria Gonzalez, had both reported seeing the infant during their rounds between midnight and 4 a.m. Yet when the day shift arrived, the baby was gone. What troubled investigators most was the complete absence of physical evidence. Hospital security protocols required multiple key card swipes to access the maternity ward, and every swipe was logged in the computer system. The records showed only authorized personnel entering the area throughout the night. No windows had been tampered with, no doors showed signs of forced entry, and most puzzling of all, no one had seen or heard anything unusual during the critical hours when the baby disappeared. The FBI was called in within 48 hours, treating the case as a potential kidnapping. Agent Margaret Williams, a specialist in missing children cases, established a command center at the hospital and began interviewing every person who had been in the building that night. Her team included forensic specialists who went over every inch of the maternity ward, looking for fingerprints, hair samples, or any physical evidence that might explain how someone had managed to remove an infant from one of the most secure areas of the hospital. Lisa Hartwell became the face of the tragedy, appearing on local and national news programs to plead for information about her missing son. Her story resonated with mothers across the country, a young woman trying to do the right thing by giving her child to a loving family, only to have that child stolen before the adoption could take place. Donations poured in to support the search effort, and volunteers traveled from across the Midwest to join the investigation. But as the weeks passed without any credible leads, the case began to take on an almost mythical quality in Springfield. Some residents whispered about supernatural explanations, while others speculated about elaborate conspiracies involving hospital staff or adoption agencies. The truth, investigators would later discover, was far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined, involving a criminal network that had been operating across multiple states for years, stealing babies from vulnerable mothers and selling them to wealthy families willing to pay enormous sums for untraceable adoptions. The investigation revealed disturbing inconsistencies in the hospital's records from that night. 3 different nurses claimed to have checked on the baby between 2 and 4 a.m., yet their documented times overlapped in ways that suggested not all of them could be telling the truth. Dr. Reeves mentioned seeing an unfamiliar woman in scrubs near the nursery around 3:30 a.m., but security had no record of any unauthorized personnel entering the building. Most troubling of all, the hospital's internal phone system showed a call made from the nursery to an outside number at 3:47 a.m., a number that led to a disconnected line when investigators tried to trace it. The case consumed Detective Rodriguez's life for months. He interviewed dozens of hospital employees, adoption agencies, and anyone who had been in the building during the critical time frame. He followed leads that took him across Missouri and into neighboring states, chasing rumors of black market adoption rings and corrupt medical professionals. But every lead eventually went cold, leaving him with a case file full of theories and suspicions, but no concrete evidence to support an arrest. Lisa Hartwell's life was forever changed by the disappearance. She returned to college but switched her major from education to criminal justice, driven by an obsession to find her son that would define the rest of her life. She studied investigative techniques, learned about missing persons databases, and began building a network of contacts in law enforcement and social services. Her professors recognized her exceptional dedication and encouraged her to pursue a career in victim advocacy, knowing that her personal experience gave her unique insights into the needs of families dealing with missing children cases. Years passed, and the case officially went cold, but Lisa never stopped searching. She married David Martinez, a social worker who understood her commitment to finding her son, and together they had 2 more children. But the missing baby was always present in their household. His photo remained on the mantle, his birthday was observed every year, and any news story about found children or resolved missing persons cases was carefully studied for potential connections to their own situation. The Andersons, the couple who were supposed to adopt Lisa's baby, moved away from Kansas City within 6 months of the disappearance. They couldn't bear the constant reminders of the child they never got to hold, and the media attention had made their lives unbearable. They eventually adopted a daughter from another agency, but they never forgot the baby boy who had been stolen before they could bring him home. The adoption agency that had arranged the placement, Loving Families Adoption Services, expressed sympathy and cooperation with the investigation, but their records regarding the case were surprisingly sparse, leading some investigators to question whether the agency had been entirely forthcoming about their role in the planned adoption. As the first anniversary of the disappearance approached, the Springfield community held a vigil for Baby Boy Hartwell and other missing children. Lisa spoke to the gathered crowd, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I know my son is out there somewhere. I know someone is caring for him, and I pray every day that whoever has him loves him as much as I do. But I also know that he belongs with me, and I will never stop looking for him." The vigil became an annual tradition, drawing families from across the country who were dealing with similar tragedies, creating a network of support and shared determination that would prove crucial in the years to come. 25 years later, in the summer of 2023, a young man named Marcus Thompson sat in his modest apartment in Denver, Colorado, staring at the results of a DNA test he'd taken on a whim. At 25, Marcus had always felt disconnected from his adoptive family despite their love and support. The Thompsons had found him as an infant through what they believed was a legitimate private adoption agency. But the paperwork had always been strangely sparse, and questions about his origins had been met with vague answers and promises that the birth mother wanted complete anonymity. The Thompsons had always been open about Marcus being adopted, but their story had never quite made sense to him. They claimed to have adopted him through Loving Families Adoption Services when he was just 3 days old, but the documentation they showed him seemed incomplete compared to what his friends who were also adopted had received from their agencies. When Marcus asked about medical history or any information about his birth parents, Robert and Janet Thompson would become visibly uncomfortable and change the subject, insisting that the birth mother had specifically requested no contact and no sharing of information. Growing up, Marcus had accepted these explanations, but as he reached adulthood, the gaps in his origin story began to bother him more and more. He looked nothing like his adoptive parents. His dark hair and olive complexion contrasted sharply with the Thompsons' fair features. More troubling were his recurring dreams about a woman crying and calling his name. Dreams that had persisted since childhood, but which his adoptive parents dismissed as imagination or the result of watching too many movies. The DNA test had been a Christmas gift from his girlfriend, Emma, who was passionate about genealogy and had been encouraging Marcus to explore his roots. "You deserve to know where you came from," she had told him. "Even if you never contact your birth family, having that information might help you understand more about yourself." Marcus had been reluctant, partly out of loyalty to the Thompsons and partly out of fear of what he might discover. But Emma's enthusiasm had finally convinced him to submit the sample. The results changed everything. Not only did they show no genetic connection to the Thompson family, which he expected, but they also revealed a match to someone named Lisa Hartwell Martinez, listed as a potential mother with 97% probability. More shocking still, the database showed that Lisa had been actively searching for genetic matches for over 2 decades, with a note attached to her profile that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Searching for my son, stolen from St. Mary's Hospital, Springfield, MO, November 15, 1998. Marcus spent 3 sleepless days researching the case, diving deep into newspaper archives and police reports that had been digitized over the years. The details were horrifying and familiar. The dates matched his approximate age, the location aligned with what little he knew about his origins, and most chilling of all, several photos of Lisa from 1998 showed features that were unmistakably similar to his own. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn jawline, the same way of tilting the head when concentrating. But there were discrepancies that troubled him. According to the news reports, Baby Boy Hartwell had been scheduled for adoption with a family named Anderson, not Thompson. The adoption agency mentioned in the articles was Loving Families Adoption Services, the same agency his adoptive parents claimed to have used, but the timeline didn't match. If he had been stolen on November 15, 1998, how had he ended up with the Thompsons just 3 days later, as they had always claimed? The more Marcus researched, the more questions arose. He found records showing that Loving Families Adoption Services had been investigated by state authorities in 2001 for irregularities in their documentation, but the investigation had been closed without charges being filed. The agency's director, Catherine Mills, had died in a car accident in 2015, taking any potential answers with her. Most disturbing of all, Marcus discovered that several other families had reported problems with adoptions arranged through Loving Families, including cases where the promised medical histories had turned out to be completely fabricated. Emma helped Marcus piece together a timeline of his early life, using the DNA results and the newspaper coverage of his disappearance. The evidence was overwhelming. He was Baby Boy Hartwell, the infant who had vanished from St. Mary's Hospital and had been searched for by law enforcement and volunteers for months. But if that was true, it meant that the people he had called Mom and Dad for 25 years had not rescued him from an unwanted situation as they had always claimed. Instead, they had somehow acquired a stolen baby and had spent his entire life lying to him about his origins. The confrontation with his adoptive parents was the most difficult moment of Marcus's life. He sat across from Robert and Janet Thompson in their immaculate suburban living room. The DNA results and newspaper articles spread across the coffee table like evidence at a trial. The silence stretched for several minutes as his adoptive parents studied the documents, their faces growing pale as they realized the implications of what Marcus had discovered. "We need to talk," Marcus said finally, his voice steady despite the emotions churning inside him. "I know who I really am, and I know that you've been lying to me my entire life. What I need to understand is why, and I need to know exactly how you came to have me." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Marcus watched as the two people who had raised him seemed to age years in the space of a few seconds. Janet Thompson began to cry, her hands shaking as she reached for the newspaper clippings that showed her son's birth mother pleading for his return. "We just wanted a baby so badly," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We had tried for 15 years, gone through 6 miscarriages, spent our entire savings on fertility treatments that didn't work. When Catherine contacted us and said she could guarantee us a healthy newborn with no legal complications, we didn't ask the questions we should have asked." Robert Thompson, who had taught Marcus to throw a baseball and helped him with homework for 18 years, looked aged beyond his 72 years. "She told us the birth mother was a drug addict who had abandoned the baby at the hospital," he said, his voice barely audible. "She said the baby needed a loving home immediately, and that the official channels would take months or years. We convinced ourselves we were saving you from a terrible situation." Marcus felt his world crumbling as he realized the full scope of the deception. "You knew there was a chance I had been stolen," he said, the words coming out as more of a statement than a question. "The timing, the lack of paperwork, the way Catherine Mills operated. You had to have suspected that something wasn't right, but you chose not to investigate because having a baby was more important to you than making sure that baby wasn't wanted by someone else." The conversation continued for hours, with the Thompsons alternating between attempts to justify their actions and tearful apologies for the pain they had caused. They revealed that Catherine Mills had contacted them just days after the disappearance made national news, offering them a baby that perfectly matched the description of the missing infant. The price had been $85,000, far more than typical adoption fees, and Catherine had been explicit about the need for secrecy and the importance of never trying to trace the child's origins. Marcus learned that his adoptive parents had paid the money without question, desperate to believe that they were finally going to have the child they had dreamed of for so long. They had moved from Kansas to Colorado shortly after the adoption, ostensibly for Robert's job, but actually to distance themselves from any potential connections to the Springfield case. They had destroyed most of the paperwork from the adoption, keeping only the bare minimum needed to enroll Marcus in school and obtain documents like a social security card. The revelation that his entire childhood had been built on a foundation of lies and stolen identity left Marcus reeling. Every birthday celebration, every family photo, every moment of love he had experienced with the Thompsons had been tainted by the knowledge that somewhere his real mother had been searching for him, never knowing if he was alive or dead. The guilt was overwhelming, not just for the Thompsons' crimes, but for his own role in perpetuating them, even unknowingly. But Marcus also discovered something that would prove crucial in bringing justice to other families affected by Catherine Mills's criminal enterprise. Hidden in a box of old financial records, he found a receipt for the $85,000 payment to Loving Families Adoption Services, along with a handwritten note from Catherine Mills that mentioned other arrangements and additional placements. The note included a reference to a storage unit in Kansas and a cryptic comment about keeping records for insurance purposes. The legal aftermath was swift and merciless once Marcus decided to come forward with his story. The FBI reopened not only his case, but dozens of others from the late 1990s and early 2000s, finding connections to Catherine Mills' operation in 7 different states. The storage unit referenced in Catherine's note contained boxes of documents that detailed an elaborate baby trafficking operation involving corrupt hospital employees, social workers, and medical professionals who had been stealing newborns from vulnerable mothers and selling them to wealthy families willing to pay exorbitant fees and ask no questions. The Thompsons were arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit kidnapping, child trafficking, and fraud. Despite their advanced age and their genuine love for Marcus, the evidence of their knowing participation in the illegal adoption was overwhelming. The financial records showed they had paid far above market rates for the adoption, and their immediate relocation after acquiring Marcus demonstrated consciousness of guilt. Both received substantial prison sentences, with Robert getting 12 years and Janet receiving 10 years. More arrests followed as the investigation expanded. The documents from Catherine Mills' storage unit revealed a network of corruption that had operated across multiple states for over a decade. 3 doctors who had falsified birth certificates, 7 nurses who had facilitated the thefts, 2 social workers who had provided inside information about vulnerable mothers, and 14 adoptive families who had knowingly purchased stolen babies were all charged in connection with the trafficking ring. The scope of the conspiracy shocked law enforcement officials who had worked the original cases. Detective Frank Rodriguez, now retired but still haunted by the unsolved disappearance of Baby Boy Hartwell, was contacted by the FBI to provide information about the original investigation. "We always suspected there was more to this than a random kidnapping," he said, reviewing the evidence that had finally brought the case to a resolution. "But we never imagined it was part of something this large and organized." The investigation revealed that Catherine Mills had been targeting specific types of mothers, young, unmarried women with limited family support who were planning to give up their children for adoption. Working with accomplices inside various hospitals, she would arrange for the babies to be stolen just before the official adoption proceedings were to take place. This created the perfect cover story. The babies were already expected to disappear into the adoption system, so the theft would be attributed to random kidnapping rather than organized crime. The families who had adopted these stolen children were not innocent victims, as the documents made clear. They had been fully aware they were participating in illegal adoptions, paying enormous sums specifically because they wanted babies with no legal complications or birth parent rights to worry about. The paperwork showed that many of these families had been frustrated by the lengthy and invasive process of legal adoption and had sought out Catherine Mills because she promised to bypass all the traditional requirements and waiting periods. Marcus struggled with complex feelings about the revelations regarding his adoptive parents and the other families involved in the trafficking ring. While he was grateful to finally know the truth about his origins, he also had to grapple with the reality that people he had loved and trusted had committed serious crimes to obtain him. The therapy he underwent to process these emotions helped him understand that his feelings for the Thompsons didn't diminish his connection to his birth family, and that it was possible to grieve for the loss of one family while celebrating the recovery of another. But the most profound healing came from his reunion with Lisa Hartwell Martinez, the woman who had given birth to him 25 years earlier and had never stopped searching for him. In September 2023, Marcus traveled to Springfield, Missouri, to meet his birth mother at the same St. Mary's Hospital where he had been born. The reunion was both joyful and heartbreaking, representing the end of a 25-year nightmare, but also highlighting all the years that had been lost to Catherine Mills's criminal enterprise. Lisa had remarried and had 2 other children, but she had never stopped searching for her firstborn. Her apartment was filled with case files, missing person flyers, and a meticulously maintained timeline of every lead she had followed over the decades. She had become a victims' rights advocate and private investigator, using her experience to help other families find missing children. "I helped reunite 43 other families with their missing children over the years," she told Marcus as they sat together in the hospital cafeteria. "Each time I learned something new that I hoped would help me find you." Marcus learned that he had 2 younger siblings, a brother named David, now 21, and studying engineering, and a sister named Christina, 18 and about to start college. Both had grown up knowing about their missing brother, helping their mother stuff envelopes with missing person flyers, and participating in searches across multiple states. The family had never been whole, but they had never stopped trying to become whole again. The reunion was complicated by the reality that 25 years of separation couldn't be erased overnight. Marcus had to learn about his birth family's traditions, inside jokes, and shared experiences that he had missed. Lisa had to accept that the baby she had lost was now a grown man with his own life, relationships, and identity. But they also found remarkable similarities. Marcus's passion for helping others mirrored Lisa's career in victim advocacy, and his methodical approach to problem-solving was remarkably similar to his biological father's engineering mindset. David Martinez, Lisa's husband and the stepfather Marcus had never known he had, welcomed him with open arms, but also helped facilitate the delicate process of building relationships that should have existed for decades. The family attended therapy together to navigate the complex emotions involved in such an unusual reunion, learning how to balance their joy at being reunited with their grief for all the time that had been lost. The story made national headlines when Marcus and Lisa decided to go public with their experience. Their joint interview on a major news program brought attention to the hundreds of families still searching for children who had disappeared under suspicious circumstances during the 1990s and early 2000s. The Catherine Mills case became a catalyst for legislative changes in adoption procedures and hospital security protocols designed to prevent similar trafficking operations from succeeding in the future. Marcus chose to legally change his name to Marcus Hartwell, honoring both his birth mother and the identity that had been stolen from him as an infant. He moved to Springfield to be closer to Lisa and his siblings, enrolling in law school with the goal of specializing in family reunification cases. The transition wasn't easy. He had to leave behind his life in Denver, including his relationship with Emma, who couldn't handle the complexity of his situation and the media attention that came with his story. But there was also profound healing in finally knowing the truth and being reunited with his biological family. Marcus discovered that many of his personality traits, interests, and even career aspirations aligned closely with his birth family's characteristics. The sense of displacement he had always felt growing up with the Thompsons finally made sense, and he began to understand aspects of his personality that had never quite fit with his adoptive family's dynamics. The legal resolution of the case brought some measure of justice, but it couldn't restore the 25 years that had been stolen from Marcus and his birth family. Lisa had missed watching her firstborn take his first steps, lose his first tooth, graduate from high school, and become the remarkable young man he had grown into despite his stolen beginning. Marcus had missed knowing his biological father, who had died in a car accident when Marcus was 15, never knowing he had a son who wanted to meet him. The ripple effects of Marcus's discovery continued to spread throughout the following year. The FBI's reopened investigation led to the identification and reunion of 11 other children who had been trafficked through Catherine Mills's operation. While not all of the stories had happy endings, some birth parents had died during the intervening decades, and some adoptive families had genuinely believed they were participating in legal adoptions. Each case brought answers to families who had spent decades wondering and hoping. Detective Frank Rodriguez, who had promised Lisa 25 years earlier that the case would never be closed, attended the press conference where Marcus and Lisa announced the resolution of their case. "This is why we never close these files," he said, his voice thick with emotion. 25 years ago, I promised Lisa we wouldn't give up, and even though I retired without solving the case, justice finally found its way home. Sometimes the answers come from directions we never expected, but they do come. The Catherine Mills trafficking ring was ultimately determined to be responsible for the theft and illegal adoption of over 60 children across 7 states, making it one of the largest organized child trafficking operations in modern American history. The case led to significant reforms in adoption procedures, including mandatory DNA testing for all adoptions involving newborns, enhanced hospital security protocols, and improved cross-state coordination of missing children investigations. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus's story became a symbol of hope for the thousands of other families still searching for missing loved ones. His case proved that even the most carefully hidden truths eventually find their way to the light, and that love can survive even the cruelest attempts to destroy it. The annual vigil that had been held in Springfield for Baby Boy Hartwell was transformed into a celebration of his return and a renewed commitment to finding other missing children. Lisa Hartwell Martinez continued her work as a victims advocate, but with a new understanding of both the pain and the possibility inherent in missing children cases. "I never gave up hope because I couldn't," she said during her final interview about the case. "Hope was all I had for 25 years, and it turned out to be enough. If our story helps even one other family find their missing child, then everything we went through will have been worth it." Marcus Hartwell graduated from law school and established a non-profit organization dedicated to helping families navigate the complex legal and emotional challenges of reunification cases. His unique perspective as both a found child and a legal professional made him particularly effective at helping other families who were dealing with similar situations. The organization, called Second Chances Family Services, provided free legal assistance, counseling services, and investigative support to families searching for missing relatives. The legacy of the Catherine Mills case extended far beyond the individual families who were reunited. The investigation led to the establishment of a national database for tracking suspicious adoption activities, improved training for hospital security personnel, and enhanced cooperation between law enforcement agencies across state lines. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of young mothers in crisis situations and led to increased support services for women facing unplanned pregnancies. For Marcus, the most important outcome was not the legal justice or the systemic changes, but the simple fact that he finally knew who he was and where he came from. The identity that had been stolen from him as an infant had been restored, along with the family relationships that Catherine Mills had tried to destroy. While the 25 years of separation could never be recovered, the love that had sustained Lisa through decades of searching had proven strong enough to rebuild what had been broken, creating new bonds that honored both the past that had been lost and the future that was finally possible.